Ryan DeLuca wasn't supposed to die that night. At 33, he stood at the pinnacle of law enforcement achievement in Iron Ridge, Montana, a decorated officer whose reputation extended far beyond the snow-capped peaks surrounding this isolated mountain town. While most cops his age were still proving themselves on patrol, Ryan had already established the DeLuca Detective Academy, a prestigious training institution that attracted aspiring investigators from across the Northwest. His methods were legendary. Cold cases that had haunted departments for decades found resolution under his meticulous examination. Missing persons returned home. Killers who thought they'd escaped justice found themselves in handcuffs, staring into Ryan's unwavering blue eyes. His success rate was extraordinary. 23 cold cases solved in just 5 years. Families who'd lost hope began seeking him out specifically, driving hours through Montana's unforgiving winters just to sit across from the man who could find answers where others found only dead ends. The academy he founded became a testament to his philosophy. Evidence doesn't lie, and time doesn't erase truth. Students filled notebooks with his techniques, hung on every word during his legendary reconstruction seminars, and graduated ready to apply his revolutionary approach to investigative work. But Ryan's achievements weren't confined to professional accolades. His home life painted the picture of the American dream realized against Montana's rugged backdrop. His wife, Catherine DeLuca, commanded respect in her own right as a senior manager at First Mountain Bank, one of the largest financial institutions in the state. She'd climbed the corporate ladder through sharp intellect and sharper instincts, managing portfolios worth millions while somehow never missing their children's school events. Friends joked that the DeLuca household ran on precision timing and unwavering dedication. Their pride and joy, twins Michael and Sarah, were following paths that promised to eclipse even their parents' remarkable accomplishments. Both attended the University of Montana's prestigious medical program in Missoula, consistently ranking in the top 5% of their class. Michael specialized in emergency medicine, driven by childhood memories of his father's stories about saving lives in critical moments. Sarah pursued forensic pathology, inspired by watching her father piece together evidence that spoke for victims who could no longer speak for themselves. The family's holiday gatherings buzzed with passionate discussions about cases, diagnoses, and the intersection of justice and medicine. Hit subscribe if you believe everyone should be treated fairly. Only haters, manipulators, and trolls won't subscribe. If you believe people should be treated fairly, hit subscribe. Trolls won't. Comment, "I stand for justice," if you're not siding with the bully. Iron Ridge itself seemed built for someone like Ryan DeLuca. Population barely cresting 4,000, this wasn't a place where violent crime typically flourished. Neighbors knew neighbors. Doors remained unlocked. The biggest incidents usually involved drunk teenagers or occasional domestic disputes. Ryan's presence had made it even safer, his patrol car a symbol of protection rather than intimidation. Iron Ridge itself seemed built for someone like Ryan DeLuca. Population barely cresting 4,000, this wasn't a place where violent crime typically flourished. Neighbors knew neighbors. Doors remained unlocked. The biggest incidents usually involved drunk teenagers or occasional domestic disputes. Ryan's presence had made it even safer, his patrol car a symbol of protection rather than intimidation. Children waved. Elderly residents stopped him for conversations about their grandchildren. The local diner kept his favorite booth perpetually available. December 1996 arrived with characteristic Montana brutality. Temperatures plunged to -15 degrees. Snow fell in thick, suffocating sheets that turned familiar roads into treacherous unknowns. The academy had closed early for winter break, sending students home with assignments, and Ryan's final reminder, trust the evidence, but never stop questioning. Catherine was preparing for the bank's year-end audit. The twins had returned from Missoula, filling their childhood home with laughter and medical textbooks scattered across the kitchen table. On December 19th, Ryan took the night shift, covering for a colleague whose wife had just given birth. It was supposed to be routine, maybe a stranded motorist needing assistance, perhaps a welfare check on elderly residents living alone. Nothing suggested that this particular night would transform Iron Ridge from a place of safety into a town marked by tragedy. Nothing indicated that the man who'd solved so many mysteries was about to become one himself. The snow continued falling, covering everything in pristine white silence. Somewhere in that darkness, Ryan DeLuca encountered something that would end his life and shatter his family's carefully constructed world. The detective who always found answers would leave behind the most haunting question of all. What happened in those final hours? The static crackle of police radio filled Iron Ridge's dispatch center that December night, punctuated by occasional check-ins from Officer Ryan DeLuca. His voice came through calm and professional, reporting nothing unusual during his patrol of the town's outer perimeter. At 10:47 p.m., that routine shattered. "Dispatch. This is Unit 7. Ryan's voice cut through the silence, tension bleeding into his usually steady tone. "I've got movement near the quarry. 2 figures, approximately 50 yards from the access road. Investigating now." Dispatch operator Linda Morrison responded immediately. "Copy that, Unit 7. Do you need backup?" Silence. "Unit 7, please confirm. Do you require assistance?" More silence. Just the empty hiss of an open channel, then nothing. The radio went dead. Linda's hands trembled as she frantically attempted contact. "Unit 7, respond. Ryan, are you there?" She dispatched every available officer to the old limestone quarry, a sprawling, abandoned industrial site that had been shuttered since the early 1980s. The location was notorious among local teens as a party spot, but on a night this brutal, nobody should have been there. Officers arrived within 12 minutes to find a scene that defied easy explanation. Ryan's cruiser sat abandoned, driver's door hanging open, engine still running, headlights cutting through the swirling snow. His portable radio lay in the front seat. His service weapon remained holstered on his duty belt, which hung from the steering wheel, as if he'd removed it deliberately. The tire tracks told a chaotic story. Fresh impressions circled the cruiser in erratic patterns, suggesting at least 2 other vehicles had been present. Footprints led away from Ryan's car toward the quarry's edge before disappearing into deeper snow. The responding officers followed the tracks as far as they could, shouting Ryan's name into the howling wind. They found him 40 minutes later. Ryan DeLuca lay face down in a shallow depression near the quarry's frozen retention pond, his body already dusted with fresh powder. The medical examiner would later determine he'd been struck repeatedly with a blunt object, likely a tire iron or baseball bat. His injuries suggested he'd tried to defend himself, his knuckles scraped and bloodied. But he'd been outnumbered and overwhelmed. The attack had been savage, personal, and sustained. What investigators discovered in the following days made the case even more devastating. Ryan had fought hard enough to leave his mark on at least one attacker. Skin cells were recovered from beneath his fingernails. He'd seen their faces. In those final moments, as his life drained into the Montana snow, Ryan DeLuca knew exactly who had killed him. But he'd never get the chance to tell anyone. The cruel irony emerged weeks later when detectives from the state police finally pieced together the motive. 2 men, Derek Holloway and Marcus Chen, both with minor criminal records, had committed a brutal rape 3 days before Ryan's murder. Their victim, too traumatized and terrified to report the crime immediately, wouldn't come forward until January. Holloway and Chen had spotted Ryan's cruiser near the quarry that night and panicked, convinced the decorated detective was closing in on them, that somehow he'd already connected them to their crime. He hadn't. Ryan DeLuca had no idea what they'd done. He'd simply been investigating suspicious activity, likely assuming he'd stumbled upon trespassing teenagers or vandals. His killers had murdered him over a crime he didn't even know had been committed, a preventive strike against an investigation that didn't exist. By the time the snow stopped falling at dawn, those tire tracks had vanished completely. The footprints disappeared. The wind had swept away nearly every trace of evidence from the scene, as if nature itself conspired to bury the truth alongside Iron Ridge's finest officer. Sheriff Tom Bradshaw, a 30-year veteran who'd worked alongside Ryan for nearly a decade, stood at the quarry's edge the next morning, staring at the spot where his friend had fallen. His voice broke when he addressed the assembled officers and growing media presence. "This was an ambush," he declared, jaw clenched with barely controlled rage. "Someone lured Ryan out here and murdered him in cold blood. We will not rest until we bring whoever did this to justice." The town rallied immediately. Fundraisers for Catherine and the twins materialized overnight. A reward fund swelled to $50,000 within a week. Citizens organized search parties, though nobody knew what they were searching for. Local businesses posted Ryan's photograph in their windows above handwritten pledges. "We remember. We won't forget." But remembering wasn't enough. Without suspects, without witnesses, without the evidence that Ryan himself had always insisted would lead to truth, the investigation stalled. The detective who'd solved 23 cold cases had become one himself. The question that haunted Iron Ridge as 1996 turned to 1997 was simple yet devastating. If Ryan DeLuca couldn't solve his own murder, who could? The investigation into Ryan DeLuca's murder should have been Iron Ridge's finest hour. Every resource mobilized, every lead pursued with relentless determination. Instead, it became a masterclass in institutional failure, marked by disappearing evidence, convenient amnesia, and a blue wall of silence that even Ryan's legendary reputation couldn't penetrate. The Montana State Police took over within 48 hours, citing conflict of interest concerns with the local department investigating one of its own. Lead investigator Detective Sarah Vance arrived with a reputation for tenacity and a promise to Catherine DeLuca that no stone would remain unturned. She established a command center, interviewed every Iron Ridge officer, and meticulously reconstructed Ryan's final 24 hours. By March 1997, her official report concluded: no evidence of departmental involvement, no credible suspects identified, investigation ongoing, but leads exhausted. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. The cracks appeared almost immediately. Deputy Marcus Webb, just 8 months out of the academy and still idealistic enough to believe in the system, made a statement in January that should have redirected the entire investigation. During a routine vehicle inspection 2 days after the murder, he'd noticed something unusual about Unit 7, Ryan's cruiser. There was a fresh dent on the rear driver's side panel. Webb told investigators, his voice steady despite obvious nervousness. Deep impact, maybe 8 inches across. Paint transfer suggested another vehicle made contact. But when I checked the collision reports for the past 6 months, there was nothing. Unit 7 was listed as having no body damage in the last inspection dated November 15th. Webb had photographed the damage with his personal camera, understanding instinctively that something wasn't right. He'd logged the observation in his patrol notebook with meticulous detail. Date, time, exact location of the dent, measurements. He'd even collected a paint sample from the transfer mark, sealing it in an evidence bag according to protocol Ryan himself had taught at the academy. 3 weeks later, Webb's statement disappeared from the official case file. The photographs vanished from the evidence locker. His patrol notebook went missing from his locker. When he pressed his superiors about the discrepancies, he was told quietly but firmly that he'd been mistaken, that the dent was old damage, that he was young and confused and should focus on learning his job rather than playing detective. Marcus Webb resigned 4 months later and left Montana entirely. In his exit interview, he said nothing about Ryan DeLuca. He'd learned what happened to officers who asked too many questions. The second investigative thread proved equally troubling. In February, state investigators identified 4 individuals who'd been documented in the quarry area between 9:30 and 11 p.m. on the night of the murder. Security footage from a gas station 3 miles away had captured their vehicle, a dark blue Ford pickup, heading toward the quarry access road at 9:47 p.m. The truck belonged to Travis Morrow, a local contractor with connections throughout Iron Ridge's business community. His passengers that night were his brother Kyle Morrow, longtime friend Jackson Ellis, and Ellis's cousin, Danny Reichert. All 4 had spotty records: bar fights, DUIs, minor theft charges that somehow never resulted in serious consequences. The interrogations lasted 3 days. All 4 maintained identical stories. They'd been out driving, drinking beer, looking for a place to hang out away from town. They'd driven past the quarry but hadn't stopped, hadn't seen anything unusual, and had returned home by 10:30 p.m. Their alibis corroborated perfectly. Suspiciously so, Vance noted in her private journal. Travis Morrow's truck showed recent bodywork on the front bumper. Fresh paint, applied sometime in the week following Ryan's death. When questioned, Travis claimed he'd hit a deer on Highway 89. No collision report had been filed. No deer carcass had been documented by highway maintenance crews who routinely cleared such incidents. Run their financials, Vance ordered her team. Check phone records. Find out who they've been talking to, who they've been paying, and who's been paying them. Before the subpoenas could be processed, the investigation was quietly shelved. Evidence insufficient to establish probable cause, the official memo stated. All 4 individuals discharged from suspicion without prejudice. The case remained open but inactive. Vance protested through official channels, then unofficial ones. She was reassigned to Billings within the month. Her career trajectory suddenly and inexplicably stalled. Years later, over whiskey in a Helena bar, she'd admit to a trusted colleague, "Someone with power wanted that investigation dead. I just never figured out who." But the most explosive development came not from official channels, but from whispered conversations in Iron Ridge's bars and diners. The rumor started small, a suggestion here, an innuendo there. But by spring 1997, it had crystallized into something specific and damning. Ryan DeLuca, according to the growing legend, had been investigating one of his own. Sergeant Dale Pritchard, a 15-year veteran of the Iron Ridge Force, worked highway patrol along the Interstate 90 corridor, Montana's primary drug trafficking route connecting Seattle to Minneapolis. Pritchard had an impressive arrest record for drug interdiction, regularly pulling over vehicles and discovering substantial quantities of cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin. His busts made headlines. His superiors praised his instincts. But several defense attorneys had begun noticing patterns. Seized drug money often didn't match the amounts recorded in official reports. A bust documented as yielding $40,000 in cash would result in evidence logs showing only $25,000. Discrepancies appeared in multiple cases Pritchard had worked. The rumor insisted that Ryan had been quietly building a case against Pritchard for months, that his meticulous cold case methodology had been turned toward internal corruption, that he documented evidence of systematic theft stretching back years. The night he died, according to this theory, Ryan had arranged a confrontation, perhaps hoping Pritchard would confess, perhaps planning to make an arrest. It explained everything. The ambush, the missing evidence, the departmental stonewalling, the convenient failures of the investigation. It was also completely false. Ryan DeLuca had never investigated Dale Pritchard. No evidence existed in his files, his academy records, or his personal effects suggesting he'd even suspected departmental corruption. The rumor was a carefully constructed fiction, planted deliberately to misdirect attention and create plausible deniability. The question wasn't whether Ryan had been investigating a dirty cop. The question was, who benefited from everyone believing he had? Time has a way of transforming tragedy into ritual. In Iron Ridge, that transformation began on February 9th, 1997, exactly 2 months after Ryan DeLuca's murder. When Catherine DeLuca drove alone to mile marker 12 on Old Quarry Road, she placed a single white rose on the snow-covered ground where her husband's cruiser had been found, idling and empty, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a last desperate signal. She didn't speak, didn't pray aloud. She simply stood in the bitter cold for 17 minutes, one for each year they'd been married, then returned to her car and drove back to the house that no longer felt like home. The next year, she wasn't alone. 43 people showed up at mile marker 12 on February 9, 1998, carrying flowers, candles, and photographs of Ryan. The year after, the crowd swelled to over 100. By 2000, it had become Iron Ridge's unofficial day of remembrance, an annual pilgrimage that transcended the specific tragedy of one officer's death and became something larger. A community's refusal to forget, even when forgetting would have been easier. Mile marker 12 transformed gradually into a permanent shrine. Weathered photographs of Ryan in uniform, protected by laminated plastic, hung from the metal post. Faded stuffed animals, gifts from children who'd known him, accumulated at its base. Someone installed a small wooden cross, and though it violated highway department regulations, nobody ever removed it. Fresh flowers appeared every week, not just in February. Anonymous offerings from people who refused to let his memory fade into Montana's vast, indifferent landscape. But while the town performed its annual ritual of remembrance, the DeLuca family was quietly disintegrating. Catherine tried to maintain normalcy for Michael and Sarah, but grief had fractured something fundamental in their household. The twins returned to medical school in the spring of 1997, but their focus had evaporated. Michael withdrew from emergency medicine, unable to handle the trauma cases that reminded him of his father's final moments. Sarah threw herself into forensic pathology with obsessive intensity, as if understanding death clinically might somehow explain why her father had been taken. Catherine continued working at First Mountain Bank, her professional competence intact even as her personal life crumbled. Colleagues whispered about her 1,000-yard stare during meetings, the way she'd pause mid-sentence as if listening for a voice that would never answer. She attended therapy, took the prescribed medications, went through all the motions of healing without ever actually recovering. The house became unbearable. Every room contained Ryan's ghost, his favorite chair, his coffee mug still in the cabinet, his academy files stacked in the office he'd never returned to. The twins visited less frequently, inventing excuses about clinical rotations and research commitments. Everyone understood what nobody would say. The DeLuca home had become a mausoleum, and staying inside it meant suffocating under the weight of unanswered questions. In the summer of 2005, Catherine made the decision that felt both inevitable and devastating. She accepted a transfer to First Mountain Bank's Seattle office, packed 18 years of marriage into a moving truck, and left Iron Ridge behind. Michael and Sarah, now completing their residencies in different states, supported her decision with relief as they felt guilty admitting. "I can't keep living next to his ghost," Catherine told her sister over the phone, her voice hollow. "Every street corner, every face, every time someone mentions his name, I'm drowning here." She never returned to Iron Ridge, not even for the annual memorial. Someone else, usually Sheriff Bradshaw's widow after he passed in 2012, placed flowers at mile marker 12 on her behalf. Catherine sent money annually to maintain the shrine, a financial transaction that allowed her to honor Ryan's memory without destroying what remained of her sanity. The town did move on, in the way small towns do when tragedy becomes old news. New officers joined the force with no memory of Ryan DeLuca. The detective academy he'd founded closed in 2003, its reputation tarnished by association with unsolved mystery. Young families moved to Iron Ridge attracted by affordable housing and mountain views, unaware that their peaceful community harbored a decades-old murder that had never been solved. Sheriff Tom Bradshaw retired in 2008. His promise to bring Ryan's killers to justice unfulfilled. During his farewell speech at the community center, he mentioned Ryan's case briefly, his voice cracking. Some failures you carry forever. Some promises you can't keep, no matter how hard you try. I'm sorry I couldn't give the DeLuca family the answers they deserved. The case file, originally stored in the Sheriff's Department's evidence room, was transferred to county storage in 2010 during a departmental reorganization. Box after box of documents, photographs, witness statements, and physical evidence moved to a climate-controlled warehouse on the outskirts of Missoula, where it joined thousands of other cold cases in neat, alphabetical rows. Evidence 1996, 12 and 19, DeLuca sat undisturbed for 11 years, gathering dust in the literal and metaphorical sense. Budget cuts meant cold case units operated with skeleton crews. Technology advanced, DNA analysis improved, databases expanded, forensic techniques evolved. But old cases required manpower and funding that never materialized. Ryan DeLuca's murder, once the most urgent investigation in Montana, became just another file number in an overwhelmed system, until Emma Reeves found it. Emma was 23, a criminal justice graduate student at the University of Montana working a summer internship with the Montana Cold Case Unit. Her assignment was mind-numbingly tedious. Scan physical evidence files into the state's new digital database, creating searchable records of cases dating back to the 1960s. 8 hours a day, she fed documents through industrial scanners, her mind numbing with the repetitive work. On July 14, 2021, she opened Evidence Box 1996, 12-19 DeLuca. The first thing she noticed was the photograph. Ryan in full uniform, his confident smile suggesting someone who'd never imagined becoming a victim. The second thing was the thickness of the file. Easily 3 times larger than typical cold cases from that era. Someone had cared deeply about documenting every detail, every lead, every dead end. The third thing, the thing that made Emma pause mid-scan, was the inconsistency report filed by Deputy Marcus Webb, buried 3/4 through the stack. Emma read it once, then again, her forensics training triggering alarm bells. She pulled up the official investigation summary, compared timelines, and realized immediately that Webb's statement didn't appear anywhere in the final report. Neither did his photographs, his measurements, or his evidence sample of the paint transfer. She spent the next 6 hours reading every document in the box, taking notes, cross-referencing details. By the time her supervisor told her to go home, Emma Reeves had made a decision that would resurrect a 25-year-old murder investigation and finally answer the question that had haunted Iron Ridge for a quarter century. What really happened to Officer Ryan DeLuca? The breakthrough came from something so small it had been overlooked for 25 years, a single 9mm shell casing, cataloged as Item 47B in Evidence Box 1996, 12-19 DeLuca. Emma Reeves almost missed it. The casing sat in a small plastic evidence bag, tagged and logged with minimal notation. Found at scene, 20 feet northeast of victim's position. Ice damage present. Forensic value, minimal. The investigator who'd bagged it in December 1996 had been thorough enough to preserve it, but pessimistic enough to dismiss its potential usefulness. Exposure to freezing temperatures and snowmelt had supposedly compromised any biological evidence. That assessment had been accurate in 1996. But this was 2021, and forensic science had evolved dramatically. Emma brought the casing to her supervisor, Dr. Patricia Huang, a forensic specialist who'd worked cold cases for 15 years. Dr. Huang examined the evidence bag under proper lighting, her expression shifting from casual interest to focused intensity. The original investigator was right to be skeptical, she said, rotating the bag slowly. Ice crystals would have destroyed most biological material back then. But vacuum metal deposition wasn't widely available in the 90s, and neither was RTX sublimation. These methods can recover prints from surfaces previously considered impossible. She paused, meeting Emma's eyes. If there's anything on this casing, even a partial, we can find it now. The evidence went to the Montana State Crime Lab in Missoula, where senior technician David Park specialized in recovering degraded prints from cold cases. He used a combination of techniques that would have seemed like science fiction to the investigators who'd originally worked Ryan's case. Vacuum metal deposition to enhance any remaining ridge detail, followed by specialized chemical processing designed specifically for metal surfaces exposed to extreme environmental conditions. 3 weeks later, Park called Dr. Huang with results that would crack open a case everyone had assumed would remain forever unsolved. "I've got a partial," he said, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. 7 points of comparison, maybe 8 if the examiner's generous. Not enough for court on its own, but definitely enough to narrow down a suspect if you've got a limited pool. The print went into the Montana Automated Fingerprint Identification System, cross-referenced against law enforcement personnel who'd been active in Iron Ridge between 1990 and 1997. The database contained prints from every officer who'd worked for the department during that period, standard protocol for elimination purposes during crime scene investigations. The match came back within 48 hours. Sergeant Owen Carr, 68 years old, retired from the Iron Ridge Police Department in 2003 after 27 years of service. Current residence: Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Ryan DeLuca's former partner. The name hit the investigation team like a physical blow. Emma pulled Carr's personnel file and found photographs of him and Ryan together at academy graduations, community events, traffic stops. They'd worked side by side for 6 years before Ryan opened his detective academy. Carr had been a groomsman at Ryan and Catherine's wedding. He'd attended Michael and Sarah's baptisms. Dr. Huang studied Carr's photograph from 1996. A stocky man with thinning hair and a guarded expression that suggested someone who kept his thoughts close. He was interviewed during the original investigation, she noted, flipping through the case file. Twice, actually. Both times he provided alibis that checked out. He was supposedly home with his wife the night of the murder. Then, how does his print end up on a shell casing at the crime scene? Emma asked. That, Dr. Huang replied grimly, is exactly what we're going to ask him. The Montana State Police Criminal Investigation Division moved quickly. On October 3, 2021, Detective Lieutenant James Morrison and his partner, Detective Sarah Chen, drove to Coeur d'Alene with arrest warrants in hand and questions that had been waiting 25 years for answers. They found Owen Carr in a modest ranch house overlooking Lake Coeur d'Alene, living the quiet retirement that many former officers dream about. He answered the door in jeans and a flannel shirt, his face weathered by age, but still recognizably the same man from the 1996 photographs. When Morrison showed his credentials and mentioned Ryan DeLuca's name, something flickered across Carr's expression. Fear, resignation, or perhaps relief that the waiting was finally over. "I wondered when you'd come," Carr said quietly, and invited them inside. The interrogation began in Carr's living room, though Morrison informed him immediately of his rights and the option to have an attorney present. Carr waived his rights, a decision that would prove catastrophic for his defense, and agreed to answer questions. He seemed almost eager to talk, as if a quarter century of silence had become its own form of torture. Morrison began gently, establishing timeline and context. Tell us about your relationship with Ryan DeLuca. Ryan was my partner for 6 years, Carr said, his voice steady. Best cop I ever worked with. When he died, part of me died too. I still think about him every day. Where were you the night of December 19th, 1996? Home with my wife. We've been over this. I was questioned twice back then, and my alibi was solid. Morrison nodded, letting the silence stretch. Then he placed a photograph on the coffee table, the shell casing enlarged to show detail. Do you recognize this? Carr studied it carefully. Looks like a 9mm casing, standard issue for our department back then. It was found at the scene where Ryan died, and it has your fingerprint on it. The color drained from Carr's face. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. That's impossible. I wasn't there. The forensic evidence says otherwise. Vacuum metal deposition recovered a 7-point match to your right index finger. How do you explain that? Carr's composure cracked. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window, staring out at the lake as if it might provide answers. When he turned back, he'd constructed his first story. Desperate, improvised, and transparently false. I must have handled that casing during training, he said, words tumbling out too fast. Ryan and I did firearms qualifications together all the time. My print probably got on spent casings during range sessions, and somehow one ended up at the scene. Contamination. It happens. Morrison's expression didn't change. The casing we found wasn't fired at a range, Owen. Ballistics matched it to the gun that killed Ryan. And even if your theory held up, you'd need to explain how a training casing from months or years earlier ended up at a fresh crime scene, uncontaminated by anyone else's prints. Carr sat down heavily, his second story already forming. Okay, look, I was there that night, but not when Ryan died. I'd stopped by the quarry earlier, maybe around 9 o'clock. There'd been reports of teenagers partying out there, and I wanted to check it out off duty. I fired my weapon once, just testing it. I'd had it serviced that week and wanted to make sure it was functioning. That's how the casing got there. Total coincidence that Ryan ended up at the same location later. Chen, who'd been silent until now, leaned forward. Why didn't you mention this during your original interviews? You were asked specifically if you'd been near the quarry. I forgot. It was just a quick stop, nothing memorable. You forgot, Morrison repeated flatly, that you'd been to the exact location where your partner was murdered on the same night he died and fired your weapon there. That's your story. The room fell silent except for the ticking of a wall clock. Carr's hands trembled as he reached for a glass of water. Both detectives recognized the telltale signs of a man whose lies were collapsing under their own weight. Here's what I think, Morrison said, his voice hardening. I think you were there when Ryan died. I think you know exactly what happened. And I think it's time you stopped lying and told us the truth. Carr's face crumpled, tears welling in his eyes, but he said nothing more. His attorney arrived 20 minutes later and ended the interview immediately. Owen Carr was arrested and extradited to Montana to face charges in connection with Ryan DeLuca's murder. But as he sat in the back of the police cruiser, staring through the window at the life he was leaving behind, one question burned through everything else. If Carr's fingerprint proved he'd been at the scene, what other evidence had been hiding in plain sight for 25 years? Part 5. The confession Owen Carr's attorney, Daniel Whitmore, was a seasoned criminal defense lawyer from Boise who specialized in representing former law enforcement officers. He arrived at the Montana State Police Barracks in Missoula with the standard playbook. Advise complete silence, negotiate a plea deal from a position of strength, and exploit every procedural weakness in a 25-year-old case. He'd successfully defended 3 cops accused of misconduct and knew that juries often gave officers the benefit of the doubt. But Whitmore hadn't counted on his client's psychological state. 25 years of carrying Ryan DeLuca's death had hollowed Owen Carr out from the inside, leaving a shell of a man who'd been waiting for this moment with something approaching relief. The secret had become a cancer, metastasizing through every aspect of his life: his marriage, his retirement, his sleep, his sanity. 3 days after his arrest, Carr asked to speak with detectives again. Whitmore strongly advised against it, but Carr overruled him with quiet insistence. "I need to tell them," he said simply. "I can't carry this anymore." On October 8, 2021, Detective Lieutenant James Morrison and Detective Sarah Chen sat across from Owen Carr in Interview Room B of the Montana State Police Criminal Investigation Division. The video camera recorded everything. Every word, every gesture, every moment of the confession that would finally answer Iron Ridge's longest-held question. Morrison began with the standard formalities, ensuring Carr understood his rights and was waiving them voluntarily despite his attorney's presence and objections. Carr confirmed everything in a steady voice that suggested a man who'd already made peace with what came next. "Tell us about December 19th, 1996, Morrison said. "Start from the beginning." Carr took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep and painful. "Ryan called me around 9:30 that night. Said he needed to meet me at the quarry, that it was urgent and private. He wouldn't tell me what it was about over the phone, just that we needed to talk away from the station." He paused, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "I knew. Somehow I already knew what it was about." "What was it about, Owen?" "The evidence locker." The words came out like a confession in church. "I'd been taking money from drug busts. Not a lot at first, just a few hundred here and there, amounts that could be explained as accounting errors or confusion about what was seized. But it added up over time. By 1996, I'd probably skimmed close to $40,000 over 3 years. Chen leaned forward. "Why?" Carr laughed bitterly. "Why does anyone steal? My daughter needed surgery. Her insurance wouldn't cover it. Then my mother's nursing home costs. Then it just became easier to take than to stop. I told myself I was just borrowing from criminals, that the money was dirty anyway, that nobody was getting hurt." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. But Ryan knew. Somehow, he figured it out. Morrison let the silence stretch, allowing Carr to continue at his own pace. "I drove out to the quarry around 10:15. Ryan was already there, standing by his cruiser with a folder in his hand. When I got out of my truck, he just looked at me, disappointed more than angry. That was worse somehow. Ryan getting angry, I could have handled. But that look..." Carr's voice cracked. He said, "I know what you've been doing, Owen. I've been documenting it for 2 months. Every discrepancy, every case where the numbers don't match. I'm giving you one chance to come clean and turn yourself in before I take this to internal affairs." "What did you say?" "I denied it at first. Told him he was wrong, that there had to be some explanation. But Ryan had evidence. Logs, photographs of evidence bags, witness statements from other officers who'd noticed things were off. He'd built a case the way he built all his cases. Methodical, airtight, impossible to refute." Carr wiped his eyes. I broke down. Started crying, begging him to understand, explaining about my daughter, about the bills. I asked him to give me time to make it right, to pay the money back somehow. What did Ryan say? He said no. Carr's voice hardened with remembered desperation. He said that corruption in law enforcement was worse than the crimes we were supposed to stop, that every dirty cop made every honest cop's job harder. He said he'd given me a chance by meeting me privately instead of just filing his report, but that he couldn't let this slide. He was going to internal affairs first thing Monday morning. Morrison glanced at the calendar in his notes. December 19th, 1996 had been a Thursday. Ryan had given Carr 3 days. What happened next? I lost it. The words came faster now, as if Carr needed to purge them before he lost his nerve. I grabbed his arm, tried to take the folder away from him. Ryan pushed me back, told me to calm down. But I couldn't calm down. I could see everything falling apart, my career, my pension, my family, prison. Everything I'd worked for destroyed because I'd been stupid and weak. I pulled my service weapon. I don't even remember making the decision. It was just suddenly in my hand. Ryan froze. He said, "Owen, don't do this. Put the gun down and we'll figure something out." But I was past figuring anything out. I was just reacting. The room fell silent except for the hum of the recording equipment. Whitmore put his hand on Carr's shoulder, one last attempt to stop the confession, but Carr shook him off. Ryan went for his own weapon, not fast, not aggressive, just careful. Like he was trying to de-escalate, but preparing for the worst. We stood there for maybe 10 seconds, both of us armed, both of us breathing hard. Then Ryan said something that broke me. "I trusted you. You were my brother." Carr's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I pulled the trigger. Morrison let the confession hang in the air before asking the crucial question. Was it intentional? I don't know. Carr looked genuinely tortured by the question. In that moment, I wanted him to stop. I wanted the problem to go away. Did I consciously decide to kill him? I've spent 25 years asking myself that question, and I still don't have an answer. The gun went off. Maybe my finger slipped. Maybe I meant to fire. It doesn't matter. Ryan went down either way. Where did you shoot him? Center mass, the way we were trained. He fell backward, hit the ground hard. I ran to him, started to check for a pulse, but Carr's hands trembled. There was so much blood. His eyes were open, staring up at the sky. I said his name over and over, but he didn't respond. I think he died within seconds. Chen's voice cut through the emotion, clinical and precise. What did you do then? I panicked, completely, utterly panicked. I just killed my partner, my friend. There was no way to explain it, no way to make it right. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just frozen, looking at Ryan's body and trying to figure out what to do. Then I saw the quarry pit. It was partially frozen, covered with snow. But I knew it went down at least 30 feet. If I could get Ryan's body to the bottom and cover it with snow, maybe buy myself time to think. Morrison's expression hardened. You moved the body. I dragged him to the edge of the pit. It took everything I had. Ryan was a big guy, dead weight, and I was already exhausted from the adrenaline crash. I rolled him over the edge and heard him hit the ice at the bottom. Then I spent the next 20 minutes shoveling snow over the edge, trying to bury any trace of him. The cruiser? I drove it back toward the access road and left it running with the door open. Made it look like he'd been ambushed, like he'd gotten out to investigate something and been attacked. I scattered some of his gear around, roughed up the area to make it look like there'd been a struggle. Then I took the folder with his evidence against me, went back to my truck, and drove home. Your wife confirmed you were home all night. Carr nodded miserably. I called her from a payphone on the way back, told her I'd be home in 30 minutes and to remember that I'd been there all evening if anyone asked. She didn't question it. We'd covered for each other before on minor things. She had no idea what I'd actually done. When did you call in Ryan's disappearance? I didn't. I waited at home, expecting someone to find him within hours. But the snow kept falling. It snowed all night, all the next day. By the time the search parties went out Friday morning, the entire scene was buried under 2 feet of fresh powder. They found the cruiser, found some tracks, but never found Ryan. Morrison leaned back, processing the confession. His body was in the quarry pit the whole time. Yes. The search teams came within 50 yards of where I'd put him, but they were looking for someone who might have wandered off injured. Nobody thought to check the bottom of a frozen quarry in the middle of winter. By the time spring came and the ice melted, his body had sunk deeper or been covered by runoff. 25 years of winter storms, spring floods, and sediment just kept the secret. Chen asked the question that had haunted the investigation. Why didn't you move the body later? You had opportunities. I thought about it constantly, Carr admitted. But as time passed, it became more dangerous to try. How would I explain going to the quarry? What if someone saw me? And honestly, he looked down at his hands. Part of me wanted him to be found, wanted this to end. Living with what I'd done was worse than prison could ever be. Morrison gathered his notes, preparing to conclude the interview. Is there anything else you want to tell us? Carr looked directly into the camera, his face a mask of exhaustion and regret. I want Catherine to know I'm sorry. I want Michael and Sarah to know their father was everything they thought he was. Honest, dedicated, brave. He died because he wouldn't compromise his principles, and I killed him because I'd already compromised all of mine. His voice broke. Ryan DeLuca was a better man than I'll ever be, and I took him from everyone who loved him because I was a coward. The confession concluded at 3:47 p.m. Owen Carr was formally charged with second-degree murder, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. His attorney immediately began negotiating a plea deal, knowing that fighting the charges with a recorded confession would be futile. But one crucial element remained: recovering Ryan DeLuca's body from the quarry, where it had rested, undiscovered, through 25 Montana winters. The secret Carr had tried to freeze in time was finally thawing, and with it came the possibility of bringing Ryan home at last. The Montana State Police deployed a specialized recovery team to the abandoned limestone quarry on October 15, 2021. Ground-penetrating radar units arrived first, followed by forensic archaeologists, evidence technicians, and dive teams equipped for cold water operations. The quarry pit where Owen Carr claimed to have disposed of Ryan DeLuca's body sat 40 feet deep, partially filled with 25 years of accumulated runoff, sediment, and debris. Lead forensic archaeologist Dr. Burster Rebecca Moss coordinated the operation with the precision of a military campaign. We're not just recovering remains, she told her team during the morning briefing. We're recovering evidence from a crime scene that's been underwater for a quarter century. Every item we find needs to be documented, preserved, and cataloged exactly as if this happened yesterday. The work began slowly, methodically. Divers descended into the murky water, visibility reduced to less than 3 feet even with high-powered lights. They worked in systematic grid patterns, using handheld sonar and metal detectors to identify anomalies beneath layers of silt and organic matter. The quarry had become a catch-all for debris over the years: shopping carts, beer cans, construction waste, making the search complicated and painstaking. On the third day, October 17th, diver Michael Ortega's metal detector registered a strong, sustained signal approximately 32 feet down. Buried under 18 inches of sediment, he carefully excavated by hand, using gentle brushing motions to avoid disturbing whatever lay beneath. His gloved fingers touched something metallic, smooth, and unmistakable. A badge. Ortega's voice crackled through the underwater communication system. "I've got something. Bringing it up." The recovery team gathered at the surface as Ortega emerged, holding an evidence bag containing a tarnished but intact police badge. Dr. Moss examined it under proper lighting, then read the engraved number aloud. "Badge 217? That's Ryan DeLuca's shield number." The discovery energized the operation. Within hours, divers had located the primary site, a depression in the quarry floor where Ryan's body had come to rest after Carr had rolled it over the edge. The remains were skeletal, scattered slightly by water movement and decomposition, but remarkably preserved by the cold water and mineral-rich environment. Over the next 2 days, the team recovered every fragment with archaeological precision. Ryan's uniform, though deteriorated, remained largely intact. The heavy-duty polyester blend had resisted complete decomposition. His duty belt, boots, and equipment were cataloged piece by piece. The excavation yielded items that transformed statistics into tragedy. His wallet, still containing photos of Catherine and the twins. His service weapon, rusted but identifiable. Spent shell casings that matched the one found at the surface 25 years earlier. But 2 items stopped the recovery team cold. The first was Ryan's wedding band, still on his left ring finger, the engraving visible despite corrosion. R+C Forever, 1979. Dr. Moss carefully removed it, placing it in a special preservation container while several team members openly wept. The second was a waterlogged folder, sealed in a plastic evidence bag that Ryan had apparently been holding when he died. Inside were the documents he'd compiled against Owen Carr: financial records, photographs, witness statements, everything needed to prove systematic evidence tampering and theft. Ryan had literally died with the evidence in his hands, unwilling to let it go even when facing his killer. News of the recovery spread through Iron Ridge like wildfire. The town that had mourned for 25 years without closure suddenly faced the reality of Ryan's remains returning home. Spontaneous memorials appeared overnight. The shrine at mile marker 12 became a pilgrimage site again, covered with fresh flowers and handwritten notes thanking Ryan for his service. Catherine DeLuca received the call from Detective Morrison on October 18th. She was in her Seattle office reviewing quarterly financial reports, when her cell phone rang with a Montana area code she hadn't seen in 16 years. "Mrs. DeLuca, this is Lieutenant Morrison with the Montana State Police. We've recovered your husband's remains." Catherine's professional composure, maintained through countless business crises, shattered instantly. She made arrangements within hours, canceled meetings, booked flights, called Michael and Sarah to deliver news they'd waited half their lives to hear. Their father was coming home. She arrived in Montana on October 20th, accompanied by both children, now 43 years old and accomplished physicians in their own right. Michael had become the chief of emergency medicine at a Seattle hospital. Sarah directed a forensic pathology program in Boston. Both had built careers honoring their father's commitment to saving lives and seeking truth. But neither had set foot in Iron Ridge since their mother's departure in 2005. The family requested a private viewing before the formal identification process. In a quiet room at the Montana State Medical Examiner's office, they saw Ryan's badge, his wedding ring, and personal effects laid out with respectful precision. Catherine picked up the wedding band with trembling hands, reading the engraving she'd chosen 42 years earlier. "He never took it off," she whispered. Even at the end, he was still wearing it. The Iron Ridge Sheriff's Department, under Sheriff Maria Castellanos, the first woman to hold the position, arranged a formal ceremony for October 25th. The department had wrestled internally with how to address its catastrophic failure to solve Ryan's murder, the missing evidence, the compromised investigation, and the 25 years of unanswered questions. Sheriff Castellanos made the decision to face it directly and publicly. The ceremony took place at Iron Ridge High School's gymnasium, the only venue large enough to accommodate the crowd. Current and former law enforcement officers filled the first 10 rows, many wearing black mourning bands across their badges. Community members packed the remaining seats while overflow crowds watched on screens set up in the parking lot. Catherine, Michael, and Sarah sat in the front row as Sheriff Castellanos approached the podium, flanked by the American flag and the Montana state flag. Her voice carried clearly through the sound system, firm despite the emotional weight of her words. "We are here today to acknowledge a profound failure," she began, no preamble or softening. Officer Ryan DeLuca served this community with honor, integrity, and dedication. When he was murdered, he deserved an investigation that matched his commitment to justice. He deserved colleagues who would move heaven and earth to find his killer. He deserved a department that wouldn't let political pressure, internal corruption, or institutional convenience compromise the search for truth. She paused, meeting the eyes of several retired officers in the audience who shifted uncomfortably. He didn't get that. Instead, he got an investigation sabotaged by missing evidence, disappeared witness statements, and a blue wall of silence that protected the guilty and abandoned the victim. For 25 years, Officer DeLuca's family lived without answers because this department failed them. The gymnasium fell absolutely silent. Sheriff Castellanos continued, her voice stronger now. "We cannot undo that failure. We cannot give Catherine, Michael, and Sarah back the 25 years they spent wondering. But we can acknowledge it publicly, apologize without reservation, and commit to ensuring nothing like this ever happens again in Iron Ridge." She turned to face Catherine directly. "On behalf of the Iron Ridge Sheriff's Department, past and present, I offer our deepest and most sincere apology. Your husband died upholding his oath to serve and protect. We failed to uphold ours to him. We're sorry." The gymnasium erupted in sustained applause. Not celebration, but recognition of accountability finally delivered. Catherine stood, tears streaming down her face, and nodded acceptance. But the ceremony wasn't finished. Sheriff Castellanos produced a formal document, reading from it carefully. Effective immediately, the Iron Ridge Sheriff's Department posthumously reinstates Officer Ryan DeLuca to active duty and promotes him to the rank of sergeant in recognition of his 27 years of exemplary service. His solving of 23 cold cases, his founding of the DeLuca Detective Academy, and his ultimate sacrifice in defense of law enforcement integrity. She presented Catherine with Ryan's new badge. Sergeant stripes added to badge 217, polished to gleaming brilliance. He kept his oath, Castellanos said, echoing the words Catherine had spoken to reporters earlier, even when everyone else broke theirs. The funeral followed 3 days later, attended by over 2,000 people. Ryan was buried at Iron Ridge Cemetery with full honors. his casket draped in an American flag and carried by active duty officers from departments across Montana. Catherine placed his wedding ring in the casket, but kept his badge. A reminder that Ryan DeLuca had been above all else exactly what a police officer should be. During the graveside service, Michael DeLuca spoke briefly, his voice carrying across the assembled mourners. "My father taught me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always necessary. He lived that principle every day of his career and died because he wouldn't compromise it. If there's any meaning to be found in his death, it's this: integrity matters, truth matters, and some oaths are worth keeping no matter the cost." As the ceremony concluded and mourners filed past the grave, placing flowers and paying respects, one detail struck everyone who noticed it. Mile marker 12 on Old Quarry Road, where the annual memorials had taken place for 25 years, was exactly 12 miles from Ryan's final resting place. For a quarter century, the community had been commemorating him almost exactly the distance from where he'd actually been lying, separated by miles but connected by memory. The secret that Owen Carr had tried to freeze in time had finally thawed, bringing with it not just answers, but a reckoning with how institutions can fail the very people they exist to protect. Ryan DeLuca was home at last, his oath fulfilled, his sacrifice acknowledged, and his legacy secure as the officer who never compromised, even when it cost him everything. Part 7. The Aftermath. The plea deal came together quickly once Owen Carr's confession became public. His attorney, Daniel Whitmore, understood that taking the case to trial would be suicide. A recorded confession, physical evidence, and 25 years of lies created an insurmountable prosecution advantage. On November 12, 2021, in a Missoula courtroom packed with law enforcement officers, victims' advocates, and media from across the state, Carr stood before Judge Patricia Hendricks and entered his plea. "How do you plead to the charge of manslaughter?" Judge Hendricks asked, her voice carrying the weight of a quarter century of injustice finally addressed. "Guilty, Your Honor." Carr's voice was barely audible. "And to the charge of evidence tampering?" "Guilty." "And to the charge of obstruction of justice?" "Guilty." The prosecution had agreed to drop the second-degree murder charge in exchange for Carr's cooperation and full admission of guilt. It was a pragmatic decision that infuriated some observers, but reflected the reality of a decades-old case with complicated evidence. Manslaughter carried a potential 20-year sentence, sufficient to ensure Carr would likely die in prison given his age and deteriorating health. Sentencing was scheduled for January 14, 2022, allowing time for victim impact statements and pre-sentencing investigations. The delay gave Montana's law enforcement community time to grapple with what Carr's confession revealed about institutional corruption, failed investigations, and the unwritten code that protected bad officers at the expense of good ones. The sentencing hearing lasted 4 hours. Catherine DeLuca testified first, her composure absolute as she described 25 years of unanswered questions, the destruction of her family, and the cost of living adjacent to an unsolved murder. Michael and Sarah followed, their statements clinical and devastating. Two accomplished physicians calmly explaining how their father's death had shaped every aspect of their lives. From career choices to relationship struggles to the persistent inability to trust institutions or authority. But the most powerful testimony came from retired Lieutenant Thomas Bradshaw, Jr., son of the former sheriff who'd worked Ryan's case and failed to solve it. Bradshaw had joined the Iron Ridge Force in 2000, 4 years after Ryan's death, drawn to law enforcement specifically because of his father's obsession with finding Ryan's killer. He'd spent 15 years wearing a badge in the same department where Carr had served, never knowing he worked alongside people who'd helped cover up the crime. Bradshaw approached the witness stand in full-dress uniform, his father's memorial badge pinned beside his own. He looked directly at Carr, who sat at the defense table with his head bowed. "My father died in 2012, Bradshaw began, his voice steady despite visible emotion. He spent the last 16 years of his life haunted by Ryan DeLuca's unsolved murder. It consumed him. Every anniversary, every lead that went nowhere, every time he saw Catherine DeLuca at the grocery store, it ate away at him. He blamed himself for not solving it, never knowing that the investigation had been sabotaged from inside his own department. He paused, gathering himself. "Owen Carr, you didn't just kill Ryan DeLuca that night at the quarry. You killed something bigger. You killed our trust, in each other, in the badge, in the entire system we're supposed to represent. Every officer who knew something was wrong and stayed silent became complicit. Every piece of evidence that disappeared, every witness statement that vanished, every convenient memory lapse, they all added up to a conspiracy of silence that protected you and destroyed us." Bradshaw's voice hardened. There are good cops who left this profession because they couldn't reconcile what they knew with what they were allowed to say. There are families who'll never trust law enforcement again because we proved we protect our own, even when our own are murderers. You didn't just take one life. You damaged every life connected to this case, and you corroded the foundation of public trust that every officer depends on to do their job. He turned to Judge Hendricks. "Your Honor, whatever sentence you impose can't undo the damage. But it can send a message that corruption, cowardice, and cover-ups will eventually face consequences, even if it takes 25 years. The courtroom remained silent as Bradshaw returned to his seat. Judge Hendricks took a moment before addressing Carr directly. "Mr. Carr, you had a choice on December 19th, 1996. When Officer DeLuca confronted you with evidence of your crimes, you could have accepted responsibility, faced the consequences, and preserved your integrity. Instead, you chose violence. And then, in the moment when you might have salvaged something, called for help, attempted to save the man you'd shot, contacted authorities, you chose cowardice. You disposed of your partner's body like garbage and spent 25 years lying about it." She consulted her notes. "Your attorney argues for leniency based on your age, your remorse, and your cooperation. The prosecution argues for the maximum sentence. I've considered both positions carefully." Judge Hendricks looked up, her gaze fixed on Carr. "The court sentences you to 20 years for manslaughter, 5 years for evidence tampering, and 5 years for obstruction of justice, to be served consecutively. Total sentence, 30 years in the Montana State Prison System, with eligibility for parole after serving 85%. The calculation was simple. Carr would be 93 years old before parole consideration. Effectively, a life sentence. As bailiffs led Carr away in handcuffs, he turned briefly toward Catherine DeLuca. She met his eyes with an expression that contained no forgiveness, no understanding, just acknowledgement that justice, delayed and imperfect, had finally arrived. The press conference afterward drew national media attention. The story had everything: a heroic cop, a decades-long mystery, cutting-edge forensics, and a betrayal that struck at the heart of law enforcement credibility. Sheriff Castellanos fielded questions with careful precision, acknowledging institutional failures while emphasizing reforms implemented since she'd taken office. But the moment that went viral, replayed on news broadcasts and social media for weeks afterward, came when a reporter asked Catherine what she wanted people to remember about Ryan. "Remember that he chose integrity over survival," she said simply. In that moment at the quarry, he could have looked the other way, could have given Owen more time, could have compromised. He refused. That's who Ryan was. Someone who believed the oath mattered more than convenience. I want people to remember that such men exist, and that they deserve better than what Ryan got. The Iron Ridge Sheriff's Department moved quickly to memorialize Ryan's sacrifice and acknowledge its own failures. On February 9, 2022, the 26th anniversary of the annual memorial at mile marker 12, the department unveiled a permanent tribute in the station lobby. The installation was elegant and powerful in its simplicity. Behind protective glass, Ryan's badge, number 4127, polished to gleaming perfection, sat mounted on deep blue velvet. His sergeant's stripes, added posthumously, caught the light. Beneath the badge, a brass plaque bore an inscription that had been carefully debated by the department's memorial committee. Sergeant Ryan DeLuca Badge, 4127, 1963-1996, for the truth that thawed the snow. He kept his oath when others broke theirs. He sought justice when corruption sought silence. He served with honor until honor cost him everything. May we prove worthy of his example. The dedication ceremony was small and private, attended only by Catherine, Michael, Sarah, and current department members. Sheriff Castellanos explained the significance of the memorial's placement. "Everyone who enters this building, every officer, every citizen, every person seeking help or reporting a crime, will see Ryan's badge first. It's a reminder of what we're supposed to be and what happens when we fail to live up to that standard. It's accountability made permanent." But there was one more element to the memorial that only became apparent during certain hours. The display was positioned to catch natural light from the lobby's eastern windows. Every morning between 10:47 and 11 a.m., the exact time frame of Ryan's final radio transmission, sunlight struck the badge directly, causing it to shine with almost ethereal brilliance. The architect who designed the installation, Maria Torres, admitted it was intentional. "I wanted people to see that badge the way Ryan would have wanted to be remembered, standing in the light, refusing to hide, present and accounted for even in death." The memorial became a pilgrimage site for law enforcement officers from across the country. Cops visiting Montana made detours to Iron Ridge to see it, to pay respects, to remind themselves why the job mattered. Departments sent rookie officers there as part of their ethics training, using Ryan's story as a cautionary tale about what happens when the code of silence supersedes the code of justice. The DeLuca Detective Academy, closed since 2003, was resurrected in 2023 as a nonprofit organization dedicated to cold case investigation and forensic science education. Funded by donations and grants, the new academy operated from a renovated building in Missoula and trained investigators in the methodologies Ryan had pioneered. Emma Reeves, the intern whose curiosity had reopened the case, became its youngest instructor, teaching a course called Evidence Never Lies: Forensic Persistence in Cold Cases. Catherine DeLuca attended the Academy's reopening ceremony but declined a permanent role, choosing instead to return to Seattle where she'd built a new life. She visited Montana once yearly, always on February 9th, always placing fresh flowers at Ryan's grave and spending quiet moments at the memorial in the station lobby. During one such visit in 2024, she stood before Ryan's badge as morning sunlight illuminated it and spoke words that only she and his memory could hear. "You were right, Ryan. The truth did matter." It just took longer than either of us expected. Michael and Sarah DeLuca both incorporated their father's legacy into their work in ways that honored his commitment to justice. Michael established a trauma center protocol named for Ryan that emphasized treating victims with dignity and preserving potential forensic evidence. Sarah pioneered new techniques in cold case forensic pathology, directly citing her father's influence in professional publications. Owen Carr served his sentence at Montana State Prison, segregated from the general population for his safety. Former cops in prison rarely fared well. He declined all interview requests and maintained silence about the case beyond his original confession. In 2024, he suffered a major stroke that left him partially paralyzed and unable to speak. He remained incarcerated, his medical care provided at taxpayer expense, a fitting irony for someone who'd stolen public funds and betrayed public trust. The abandoned quarry where Ryan died became a memorial park in 2023. The pit filled and the grounds transformed into a peaceful space, with walking trails, benches, and a simple stone marker indicating the site's significance. The transformation was deliberate, turning a place of death and deception into a space for reflection and remembrance. Iron Ridge itself changed in subtle but meaningful ways. The annual memorial at mile marker 12 continued, but evolved into a broader conversation about police accountability, institutional integrity, and the cost of silence. The community that had rallied around Ryan's memory now grappled honestly with how they'd failed him, using that reckoning to demand better from their institutions. On quiet mornings in the Iron Ridge Sheriff's Department lobby, when sunlight strikes badge 4127 and causes it to gleam with brilliant light, officers pause in their duties to remember. They remember that integrity matters. They remember that truth, no matter how long buried, eventually surfaces. They remember that some oaths are worth keeping even when keeping them costs everything. And they remember Ryan DeLuca, the officer in the snow who became the truth that thawed 25 years of frozen lies, proving that justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes it's just justice waiting for the right person to care enough to find it. The snow eventually melts. The truth eventually surfaces. And badges like 4127 shine on. Reminders of what we owe to those who serve and sacrifice in the name of something larger than themselves. Hit subscribe if you believe everyone should be treated fairly. Only haters, manipulators, and trolls won't subscribe. If you believe people should be treated fairly, hit subscribe. Trolls won't. Comment, "I stand for justice," if you're not siding with the bully.